Tēnā koutou, talofa lava, maloa lele, kia orana, bulavanaka, and whakalofo lahi atu. Nau mai, haere mai, welcome to the Early Childhood Seminar Series. We'll begin our time together with karakia. Me e noi tātou. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa ponamu te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I a tātou katoa. Haumie, huie, tai kie. Thank you for joining us for today's presentation by Associate Professor Maria Cooper, Dr. Kitty Gould, and Dr. Gould Teisina. We're delighted to have them here with us today to share key learnings from a teaching and learning research initiative study co-designed with Samoan and Tongan early childhood education centres in Auckland, focusing on research and leadership as an intentional weaving of knowledge, accountability, and relationships. If any questions arise for you during the presentation that you would like to ask the presenters, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and they will respond to them during their presentation. At the end of the presentation. You can also use the chat function throughout the presentation to connect with each other and the panelists. After the seminar, a recording will be available on our Early Childhood Seminar Series YouTube channel. I will now pass over to Emeritus Professor Helen Hedges to welcome and introduce Maria, Kiri and Jean. Kia ora, Helen.
Tēnā koe, Justine. Kia ora, talofa lava maloa lele. It's my privilege to introduce an innovative team who represent a wider powerhouse team respectfully and reciprocally engaged in this teaching and learning research initiative project. Maria, Kiri and Jean are academics who are considering with their practice partners alongside their communities the principles, values, dynamics and practices of leadership grounded in Pacific ways of knowing and being. Findings from this project have wider transformative value to all early childhood settings, working with the weaving metaphors and intentions of Te Whāraki, and that espouse that they value inclusion and diversity. Maria, Kiri, Jean, your title and key concept for today are intriguing. To weave together knowledge, accountability, and relationships seems a difficult challenge. And so we look forward to hearing about these facets of your leadership and research work today. As Justine has said to our seminar participants, please post your questions in the Q&A as they arise for you, and I'll pose them to our presenters at the conclusion. For now then, over to you, Maria, Kiri and Jean.
Mauri ora, kia koutou talofa lava, maloa lelei, warm Pacific greetings and very warm thank you to Justine and Helen for your kind introduction and very generous introduction too. Thank you for this opportunity to share some insights from our national TLRI project on Pacific leadership in ECE. Who am I? I have ancestral ties to Lufi Samoa and Tovlavo, Slovakia. I am a daughter, sister, mother, and early childhood research academic at the University of Auckland. I am Maria Cooper, a co-lead of this project. What we want to start with is to acknowledge our beautiful village of support who made our research possible. Naming on the slide our valuable knowledge holders, research assistants, Samoan and Tongan language translators, senior advisors, and our national funder, the TLRI at NZCER. Whaftai tele and malo o pito to you all. So our presentation today is a weaving of stories related to our research. I'll start by introducing our Pacific project and its foundations. Jean will share a story of leading as a collective weave in her Tongan ECE setting, and Kitty will share a personal story of transformation before concluding and Q&A. We just want to note at this point, we use the term Pacific in our presentation to refer to our Samoan and Tongan early childhood communities in the research, but also to acknowledge other communities with ancestral ties to the Pacific Island nations of Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia. Also, as the insights that follow that you'll hear today are embedded in existing relationships and context, they are not directly transferable to other settings. However, we do hope the insights will inspire those in all other settings to reflect on the meanings and practices of their own leadership for the benefit of Pacific and all other children, families, and communities. So what is the story of our research? This was a collaboration between the University of Auckland and two long-standing Pacific early childhood services. Our Samoan Centre is Aotearoa Whaasamoa in Grey Lynn, Central Auckland, and our Tongan Centre, Aotearoa in Aotearoa, South Auckland. One persistent issue that we're aware of is that despite the very strong presence and contributions of our Pacific communities in Aotearoa, we still know very little about the educational leadership that is embedded in Pacific culture and community. So this situation risks leadership being defined for Pacific communities, but it also creates an opportunity to learn about leadership from our Pacific peoples. So we were motivated to understand what leadership means, what it feels like, and what it looks like when it is attuned to Pacific culture, community, and ways of knowing. The intent of our research also aligns with the Ministry of Education's Action Plan for Pacific, which calls for education to reflect Pacific identities, languages, and cultures, not just in content, but importantly in thinking, relating, and leading. For our research, we drew on Tuiatua and Vai's philosophical ideas of relationality and the va, or relationships, as tapu. In this view, the va is not just space between people. It is a sacred space, something living, something that carries meaning, obligation, and care. So rather than seeing leadership as something located in an individual, we viewed leadership as something that exists in the relationships between people. Embracing Vai's whole-of-life thinking means viewing all things as essential parts of an interconnected whole. So we couldn't separate leadership from our collaborators' stories of family, culture, spirituality, language, and place, because they are all part of the same living system. And relationality is central to this way of thinking. To uphold this in our research design, we intentionally moved away from the idea of knowledge as a research product disconnected from its people, context, communities, and histories. And instead, our design was relational and embedded in the va, supported by a view of knowledge as sacred parts of a living relationship. And we believe it is this relationality that gives life and meaning to our research. We use talanoa not just as a method, but as a way of being in the research. Collective talanoa were held with elders and with centre leaders and whaiaonga, whaiako, the teachers, former children and their parents, grandparents, and community members. Talanoa for Samoan and Tongan peoples is about open, respectful, relational conversation. It is not rushed, it is not overly scripted, and it is definitely not about taking information away from a community. So our talanoa involved taking time to build trust, respecting Samoan and Tongan cultural practices and values, allowing stories to unfold and collective meaning-making to happen, while acknowledging our va interconnections with one another and with the more holistic dimensions of life. Consistent with this approach, Pacific relational ethics guided our practices. Concepts like the Samoan whaaaloalo and Tongan whakaapapa for respect were not just values we named, but practices we had to live and reflect on how we were living throughout the project. Researcher humility involved recognizing our own limitations and not positioning ourselves as experts coming in to take knowledge away from these communities for our benefit. Instead, we came in as learners, entering into relationships with a view to building understandings of leadership together in the context of our wā. Also, reciprocity was essential. In Pacific philosophy, knowledge is also embodied and is something that is given. And when it is given, there is an obligation for a return or a giving back. So we were always asking ourselves, how will this research benefit the communities who are gifting their knowledge to us? We were also guided by the Samoan Tausi le wā and the Tongan Tauhi wā in how we were caring for the relationships, work that required ongoing attention to connection, trust, and responsibility. So you can see that our design was intentionally community-centered. We didn't rely on formal, semi-structured interviews as Kitty and I have done in our Western qualitative research. Instead, we held talanoa in different forums, ensuring the focus was on the collective as the starting point. These talanoa were framed by appropriate cultural protocols guided by our knowledge holders. We went into these sacred relational spaces with minimal fixed agenda. This allowed for fluidity and flow, for deep listening, for people to speak in their own time and way, and for mutual learning to happen. We also spent time in both centres. In Pacific philosophy, knowledge is not just spoken, it is felt because it's embodied. So place-based engagement allowed us to understand not just the physical context of leadership by being there, but also the spiritual context by feeling the environment, by grasping the wā between people, land, and culture, and by experiencing for ourselves a sense of connectedness to place. And finally, we centered stories. These were stories of family, of home, of identity that our communities wanted to share with us. Not just listening to or reading the words of these stories, though. We paid close attention to tone, pauses, emotions, including our own, what was implied rather than always what was said or written. In wai's words, meaning is not always direct or explicit. So we embrace the idea that meaning can be sensed. It can sit in the nuances, in the relationships, and in the feelings. So what did this design to the approach to the research allow us to see? It helped us to understand that Pacific leadership in these settings is not primarily about authority or position. This is acknowledged, but it is not what truly matters. What matters more is relational responsibility and the well-being of the community while sustaining children's Samoan and Tongan identities, cultures, and languages, and balancing this with external accountability. It allowed us to see that leadership is given meaning from the acts of care and service to community and the efforts to maintain harmony in the wā through supporting others. We learned that leadership in these settings is intricately connected to identity, to language, and to family. And this meant for us, we learned that it is almost unnatural to try to separate a Pacific leader from their genealogy, from their community, and from their cultural responsibilities, for these are what give meaning and life to leadership. And as Jean and Kitty will reiterate, we learned that it is the quality of relationships that determines whether anything meaningful can happen. And leaders play a key role in determining this quality through the way they nurture the relationships and are shaped by those relationships. So overall, our design was not just a choice about methods. It was a deeply ethical commitment to foreground Pacific relationality, to work in a whole of life way, and to keep the research itself open to reflecting the very kinds of leadership we were trying to understand. I want to now share the leadership stories for Aonga Whaasamoa and Akotiu Katokakala to ground what follows. To us, these leadership stories capture important qualities of leadership, They also point to the struggles, the possibilities, and the intergenerational aspects that continue to shape thinking, feeling, and practices in these services. The Aonga Wha Samoa, guided by the Samoan values of alofa, whaaaloalo, and tautua, it's love, respect, and service, was founded around 40 years ago for New Zealand-born Samoan children at risk of losing their culture, and it was deeply inspired by the Kohanga Reo's movement to keep the Indigenous language and identity alive. Founder, the late Mrs. Janice Tauma, a Palangi teacher returning from Samoa, worked with her Samoan husband and a community action group to set up the centre, first in an empty room at the Pacific Island Resource Centre and later at the Richmond Road School site in central Auckland. Jan wanted her own and other children to grow up knowing exactly who they were as Samoans. Jan's leadership can only be defined by strong advocacy and allyship, a legacy that continues to shape the philosophy, practices, and research culture of the Aonga. Jan worked through an environment with no initial government funding. She pushed for high-quality teacher training whenever she could, and she consistently spoke up for Pacific language policies despite changing political agendas. She also ensured Samoan leaders were always the face of the centre's leadership for cultural integrity. This long-standing leadership has now been handed over to her daughter, Italia. This handover holds special intergenerational meaning as Jan watched Italia grow up seeing the Aonga's original vision. By stepping into this role, Italia carries her mother's early dreams and hard work forward, keeping the centre's core philosophy alive for the next generation of Ainga. Similarly, the Foundation for Aotearoa Katokakala Centre began over 25 years ago by Mrs. Miliane Paovale, warmly known to us as Nana, and grew from a strong sense of commitment and community advocacy. After moving from Tonga to Aotearoa, Miliane began caring for her extended family's children in her mangere garage so their parents could work. Recognising that the children needed more opportunities for learning, she took leadership action. Despite being unfamiliar with the early childhood system in New Zealand, she gathered resources and worked with the Ministry of Education to register the space. Her advocacy for her community was also reflected in her personal journey. At age 55, she studied for her early childhood degree at AUT while running the centre and raising her family. Her husband continued to work to support the family, and the strong commitment to Tongan children caught the attention of the then Prime Minister Helen Clark, who visited the garage in 2004 and then provided nearly $1 million to move to a place in Otara. Today, this legacy is being handed over to her daughter, Jean, our co-lead. The transition marks an important expression of continuity in leadership and mission. Miliane views the centre as a cultural treasure, and Jean, leading alongside her mother, represents an intergenerational commitment to keep the Tongan language and identities safe for the next generation. It reflects a Tongan perspective that leadership is not an individual career path, but a shared obligation that is passed on to ensure the survival of their community o kainga ako in Aotearoa. So looking across both stories, these founders began with very little, but they were guided by a strong commitment to their children, for children to know who they are and where they come from. Their leadership lives on in the many children who've moved through education, sport, and work with a secure sense of being and feeling Samoan or Tongan. These stories invite us to reflect on our own leadership and the legacy we are shaping through the lives of others. I wish to now invite Jean to come forward to share further insights about leadership from her Tongan Centre, and she'll use the metaphor of weaving to do so. Jean, if you step forward, please.
Malo Maria. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Malo Maria. It is a blessing for me to be involved in this research with Maria and Kerry, and just continuing on speaking about leading. You know, being a practitioner and a researcher within the context of Pacific ECE in Aotearoa, I witnessed the complexities and the tensions inherent in the way that we articulate what leadership might mean or might mean for us as Pacific people. So when we looked at the Te Whāriki document, there's only one concept, one Tongan concept there, even Samoan concept, but for us Tongan, it was a whalehanga. And whalehanga, what it means for us as Tongans is that is the place where we generate and where we create our koloa, our treasures, where we do our weaving, where we do our tapa. So it's a collective place where everyone come together to ensure that we create and we make and generate koloa for our families, our kainga, and also our community. So in saying that, looking at the official document, that was the only word that could that we could make the connection to, so we can start the lalanga. So in this, when we looked at lalanga, you know, leadership is not just one way of leading, but it was actually how we looked at it. Is there a number of ideals woven together or interwoven together to ensure that we do create leadership that is meaningful, leadership that is appropriate, leadership that we find ourselves that we can connect to. So in saying that, in the next slide, when we looked at leading, we wanted to frame it using an Indigenous way of framing, so it can make sense for us. You know, sometimes when we use other ways of framing, and they're not Indigenous and they're not Tongan or Pacific, often there's mismatch there of values, and there is, you know, it does not capture the essence and the nuance of how we articulate the leading and also service and the way we taki, or in Tongan that's a leadership. So, you know, in saying that, it was really liberating, or it was very useful for us to use our own framing as a lens to understand what leadership might mean for us. So, you know, when we're doing the lalanga or the weaving, and we were talking about leadership within this project, it needed to come from our place of strength. It needed to come from the fala or the mat that we were about to weave for this particular research. So, you know, in saying that, we were weaving, who are we weaving for? You know, this lalanga, who's it for? Who's in charge of this weaving? And we wanted to weave in lalanga a fala that will be happy and be proud of and be able to pass it on to the next generations. So in saying that, you know, the selection and the process of weaving in itself is a celebration of identity, celebration of people, places, and it also connects, you know, as we migrate from Tonga to the land of Aotearoa, and in thinking that will inform our weaving for the next generation. So, you know, the whole process of lalanga in itself, it was a celebration, you know, trying to work as a collective to collate all the fe'unu, which is the strands that we are using for the weaving. And when we were looking at the strands, for the weaving. We wanted to know where we are, the place, the timing, and the place, the people. And in saying that, when we were weaving, we already thinking about the well-being of the kainga, of the nofua kainga. So in saying that, when we're doing the weaving already, the morals, the values, the rituals, where we're getting the strands from. You can't, for us Tongans, we just can't get the fe'unu from anywhere. It has to come from the right place. And knowing the protocols, and in practicing within ECE in Aotearoa, we needed to make that connections to the Ministry of Education, to research outside, not just within the walls of the center, but also the community. Who are we going to use as people to help us with the weaving? So, when we're looking at our tamariki and our whānau growing up here in Aotearoa, it was very important for us to think about what we're going to leave for them. Is the weaving that we're doing worthy of those treasures, worthy of the koloa that's been gifted to us to look after within our centers, within the context of our home? And to think about that, and using, not just relying on our own knowledge and relying on our own skills, but also relying on the multiplicities of fe'unu that we are going to weave together, that we're going to unite. So the emphasis was not on the individual fe'unu or the strand, but the emphasis was on the collective unity of those multiple strands to create a united solidarity and a resilient and a beautiful whala that is worthy of us, of rolling, of fulfilling whala and faliki, for everyone to come together and unite and sit together on that whala and be able to talanoa and share those values, those things that are important for us. So in saying that, it was also the whole idea of, when you're weaving, that you're not very fixed in the way that you're doing your weaving. It's also about, if you're making a mistake, there's also moments there that you can celebrate about unweaving and reweaving, and making sure that you have an open heart and open mind to unweave. Sometimes we're so fixed in our ways as leaders that we don't want to unweave what we have imposed or we have created, and we think this is the only way forward. But this kind of weaving that we're talking about is that it's being open and being flexible to unweave and reweave, and also getting others feedback, getting others contributions, to ensure that the weaving we're doing, it's not only just for the purpose of your own individual, but it's also for the betterment of the whole community coming together. So I think in this kind of weaving, it's just acknowledging that there are different ways. There are other ways of looking at leadership and at leading, and also sometimes it's not captured in research, the subtle differences, the feelings, the feels. So I think in the weaving, we're able to unite the values, our core values, with the cosmos, with the whanua, with the people, and those who we are journeying in this path, to ensure that our children are thriving in whatever they do here in Aotearoa. Whawhitai, Maria.
Malo or Petal Jean, listening to you reminds me of the depth of thinking that you've enabled us to be able to access in this project. And now, as you were talking, I was thinking about our responsibilities towards that deep philosophy that you're sharing too. So thank you very much. Malo Ilele Talofa Lava. I am Kerry Gould. And I just wanted to start my portion of this seminar by just briefly locating myself in the project. as someone who is not a Pacific person, but deeply engaged and committed to this project, and I'm so inspired by what I've been learning in it. I was a little bit nervous to be a part of this project, to be honest, because I wanted to get it right and be a respectful research team member, and I was aware of the ethics of joining this project team. And at times I found myself questioning what I could bring to the project. So from the start of my work, I came into the project, of course, with my own expertise and experiences of research, but I've been really careful to position myself as a learner, working alongside Maria and Jean and the teams at the Early Childhood Centre of Aotearoa Kakala and the Aonga Wha Samoa with Atalia and Ine too. And I thank all of our research partners for their generosity and being my guides and allowing me to be part of the project, and just the open-heartedness with which they've invited me in. This was my first time engaging with talanoa and with the experiences and insights of Pacific leaders in early childhood education. And that sense of being a first timer, I think, was really important, because I have really tried not to assume that I already knew about research applied in this context. And it has required me to be attentive to learning about research, about early childhood leadership in Samoan and Tongan contexts, and also a lot about myself, which is sort of the story that I want to share with you today. One of the big shifts for me in thinking about research has been in thinking about research as relational rather than primarily methodological. And in early childhood education, we talk a lot about the importance of relationships. It's one of the principles of Te Whāriki, and I think it's really deeply embedded in our ECE discourse. And that this sometimes carries over into research in early childhood education too. But this project has given me quite a different perspective on what that actually means in practice. And one thing I've learned is that relationships aren't just the precursor to research established, like at the beginning of the project through familiarization visits and the other kinds of normal relationship building things we would do before we begin data collection. But that relationships are the research. And that might sound quite simple, but I think it actually has quite significant implications. It changes what gets prioritized, how we've spent our time as researchers, and what counts as meaningful work within the project. And it has also required some shifts on my behalf in terms of how I listen, not just for patterns or themes or thinking ahead towards how something might be analysed, but listening in a way that is open to being personally changed by what is being shared. And part of that has been, for me, trying to come to some understanding of participants' experiences and emotions. There's been a lot of talk about emotion and feeling already from Maria and Jean, and worldviews, while also being really aware that I can't fully know what it means to be Pacific in Aotearoa. And it has also meant for me being vulnerable enough to allow participants to access my emotions, experiences, and worldviews. And so I've been learning to hold these tensions between vulnerability and taking a researcher stance, trying to understand and recognizing the limits of my understandings throughout the project. And this has been quite, important learning for me as a researcher, I think, and as a human being. The project has given me a more open-hearted way of approaching research than I've experienced before, which has been, I have to say, pretty uncomfortable at times. It's quite a safe place to kind of assume the researcher role as someone objective. It's been much less about extracting meanings or interpreting what I'm hearing. And I have to say that it's quite hard to break those research habits when you're listening, and much more about engaging, responding, and being accountable to what emerges in those relationships. And this experience speaks to the level of trust required too. Trust that what is being shared and how it is being shared matters, and that it is enough without needing to reshape it into something more familiar or more easily analysed. And trust from our two partnership centres that what and how we share their experiences and knowledge will be done in ways that are respectful, faithful, and accountable to those relationships. This also connects to letting go of some of the control in the research process and not feeling the need to direct where things go, but allowing participants ways of sharing and making meaning to guide what becomes important. There have definitely been moments in conversations where something has been shared that doesn't necessarily fit with the leadership scholarship or what I was expecting to hear. And those moments have really stayed with me and have created the biggest shifts in my thinking. One example I can think of is conversations with the teachers at the Aonga during our final talanoa, where two of the teachers were talking about their roles and identities in their communities and how these continue in their work in the centre. And that really challenged my own experiences of leadership as something quite bounded within a professional role. But it was also a real aha moment for me in seeing how both of the centres sustain such deep and enduring relationships with families and communities, which is something else that I was really struck by during my engagement in the project. So my involvement in this research has also involved some reflecting on my own positioning. I've become more aware of the assumptions that I bring about research and about leadership. Some research approaches or leadership frameworks can almost become like a default way of thinking because they're so familiar from my own previous experiences. And I've really been challenged to step back from that and to question some of those assumptions rather than taking them for granted. And this has involved sitting sometimes with some discomfort, recognizing the limits of my own knowledge and worldview, and resisting the urge to resolve that too quickly. I think there's always a temptation in research to move towards clarity and certainty, but this work has reminded me of the importance of staying with complexity and with not knowing. One of the key things I've taken from this project is the deeply contextual nature of leadership in each of the contexts, and just how inseparable leadership is from identity, culture, community, as well as the unique leadership legacies that are the foundations of each centre. There isn't a clear professional separation. It's lived, relational, and grounded in who people are and where they come from. And that contrasts to leadership in other contexts where professional and personal lives can be more compartmentalised, and where leaders in a centre can arrive from anywhere, and leadership is treated as something more separate from identity and community. In those contexts, teams often need to do the work of building relationships, finding shared values, or aligning around organisational priorities because those connections are not already embedded in the same way that they are in the two centres that we were working with. Meliani, the founder of Aotearoa Kakala, reminded us in our last talanoa with her that this kind of relational work, even with those you know well, is hard work. It's not easy. It's the work of leadership, and it takes experience, skill, and wisdom. And that's something that I will take away with me. The deeply contextual and relational nature of leadership that emerged from our project means that there won't be an article from this project titled something like, a how-to guide for Pacific leadership. And to be fair, that was never the intention of our project to begin with. But it is a reminder that leadership is not something that can be easily abstracted or generalized. It is enacted in specific relationships, in particular communities, and in response to particular histories, legacies, and circumstances. Across the two centres in the project, leadership is consistently enacted in relationship to others and is grounded in service, responsibility, and care. It is deeply constituted through culture and community. I can't think of one single example that was shared in either context that sits outside of those things. And again, this challenges some of my previous understandings of leadership, particularly the more decontextualized models of leadership that can dominate the education scholarship. even when those models don't focus on positional leadership. What the project can offer, I think, is an opportunity for others in early childhood to reflect on their own histories, identities, priorities, values, and relationships that shape leadership in their own contexts. And I also think that this project has something really important to offer at a systems level to better understand what matters in Pacific contexts. As someone who's particularly interested in policy, I was really struck by the experiences shared across both centres about navigating external expectations and processes such as ERO reviews. In some cases, there was clear misalignment between priorities, values, and approaches that really damaged trust. And those stories have really stayed with me, and I think highlight quite powerfully what can happen when systems don't fully recognise the context that they are working with. So for me, I hope that telling these stories is part of the work that happens next in the project and that can contribute to greater understanding and change. Overall, this project hasn't just expanded my understanding of Pacific early childhood contexts and Pacific leadership, but has opened up how I think about research in different contexts and the importance of approaching research as something that is ongoing and deeply relational. And that's something I'm still thinking through, what it means to take that seriously in practice post-research funding and publications, and how that shapes the kind of research I want to be involved in going forward. I'll just finish my section by briefly speaking about where we're heading to next in the project. At this point, we've developed some initial insights from the research, some of which you've heard today. An important part of our process was returning those insights to each centre during our final talanoa. Those conversations weren't just about checking accuracy, but about refining and deepening our understandings and making sure that what we're taking forward reflects what matters in each context and is grounded in those relationships. So the next step for us really is to return again to those final talanoa transcripts as we move forward towards producing the final report for TLRI. That report is due in June, and we want to approach it not just as a research output, but as something that needs to remain accountable to Ako Tio Kato Kakala and the Aonga Wha Samoa. Alongside that, we're thinking carefully about how we share findings more broadly with the sector, not just in academic ways, but in ways that are really accessible and meaningful to early childhood centres more broadly and can contribute to a deeper understanding of leadership and of Pacific early childhood education. We have some pretty exciting ideas actually about what this might look like, and we're really thinking about resources that centres can use at their own pace to think about their own contexts and leadership practices. So watch this space for those in the coming year. Part of the work going forward is also thinking about how the project can support wider conversations about leadership, and we hope act as a form of advocacy too, helping to make visible the knowledge, values and practices that are already present and working so beautifully within our two settings and beyond. In terms of academic outputs, we have a number of publications underway. One is focused on research ethics in Pacific contexts, which draws directly on the relational and trust-based aspects of this project. And another is exploring place and leadership, which connects strongly to what we've seen about leadership being so deeply embedded in community culture and context. So while the formal endpoint of the project is approaching really quickly, the work itself will be ongoing for the research team. And I think that reflects something else that we've learned in the project, which is that this kind of research doesn't really end when the funding ends or the final report is due in, but continues through the relationships that we've built, the conversations and talanoa that we've had, and the ways that the work is taken up in different contexts in the broader early childhood sector too. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiri and Jean, malo pito whaftai tere lava. We've finished, and so we'll hand over to you, Helen, with some time for Q&A.
Great, thank you, Maria. You've given everyone such a lot to think about. There are no questions yet from our participants, but they may still be coming. But something that I'm really intrigued about is, Maria, you talked about that meaning can be sensed.
Mm.
Jean talked about the feelings and the feels, and Kiri has talked to us about shifts in listening, assumptions, and default positions. Now, these to me seem to require great skill. I, from my lens, would know them as kind of aha moments, but it's clearly something much deeper that you're thinking about. I wondered if each of you could share an example, please, either of how you developed that skill or an example that you're going to share for centres later on about what it meant in terms of leadership.
Mm. I'm happy to start. I'll give Jean and Kitty a bit of time to think about this. I have to say that I guess in a way, part of this is a lived experience for me, growing up with my Samoan family, that I've learnt to attune myself to some of the silences in talanoa that happens in our family. And sometimes when I haven't been sure about something that's gone on in traditional ways, I've always had my mother to, explain to me what that means, or, it's required more talanoa for understanding. And so I guess that's how I've come to appreciate that communication is not just in what someone says, it can be in the silences too. And that emotion is often part of that communication because an emotion conveys meaning too in itself. One example in the project that really stood out for me was one of the Aotearoa talked about, they were going to talk about an experience they had with a professional body who came to, just check on the quality of provision there. We all know that's zero. But it's before they even said anything, there was silence across the group and the air felt heavy. And, it was immediately I knew that this was a hard story to tell. So that was a really clear example of a heavy weighted story that they were going to share with us and that we were privileged to hear, actually. And indeed, it was about the struggles and but also the possibilities that come out of those stories of struggle. So that is one hugely memorable example for me from the project. And I would say that many centres, Pacific, non-Pacific, English medium, face similar struggles and also maybe emotion is not as visible, but we've learnt to embrace that in the project because it is part of communication too and knowledge sharing. Yeah.
Thank you. Kiri, your mic's on. Have you got
Yeah.
something more you'd like to share, please?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting listening to Maria because for me, it hasn't been part of the way that I've grown up. And it's definitely been something that I wouldn't position myself as an expert at all. I'm definitely learning to listen in this way. And I agree with Maria that the role of emotion has been really important. And for me, intriguing in this project that often what people choose to share is, and how they share it is as important as what they choose to share. And so the silences, the body language, and the openness of emotion was something that was really powerful for me to experience. And I've never really had that in a research project before where, typically the research is asking questions and people are trying to respond as best they can. And in this project, I felt like the power dynamic was quite different in that we really had to trust that what was being shared was what needed to be shared, even and to find the meaning by looking at the holistic picture of what was being shared, including the silences, the feelings that were being shared, the looks, the sometimes just the feeling in the room. And I wasn't, always perfect at reading that, but it was a real learning experience for me.
Absolutely, that's what I'm saying. It's a great skill to develop. It seems to have a lot of courage and a lot of vulnerability as well. Jean, you're there?
Yes, yes, Helen. The feels and the feelings. I think, just looking at Jan's work and the legacy that she's left behind, the feelings, the feels that in itself, you don't have to explain. It's there. And for me, trying to wear the shoes that my mother has, those feelings of wanting to carry that legacy. I think it's special that even though it's a mother and daughter team, but I think also it's the lalanga that comes from the fatu. It's the fatu lalanga that is often not captured in leadership, and that's the feels that we need to spotlight more on.
Wow. Well, thank you all. I was really touched by those intergenerational stories of courage and of advocacy and of commitment to language identity and community. And I trust that our participants have had some feels and some feelings and are going away with many things to think about in relation to, as you put it, Maria, insights to inspire others in all early childhood environments, to really think about what it means to support their Pacific children and families. So whawhatai lava, malo pito. I'll hand back to Justine. Thank you all.
Thank you, Helen.
Kia ora, Helen, and thank you, Maria, Jean and Kiri, for your presentation today. I'm still processing as well, but your presentation is really a provocation, I think, for all of us to reflect on our own identities, our own positionality, and to think really deeply about how we might be part of supporting more meaningful outcomes for Pacific children in early childhood education in Aotearoa New Zealand. So I hope that we have all been listening with openness to being changed. And I'm really looking forward to further outputs from this research that you'll be able to share with our wider early childhood community. So ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. We are very appreciative of your time and your sharing of this valuable research. To our early childhood seminar series audience, if you wish to share or revisit this presentation, please check out our early childhood seminar series YouTube channel, and the recording of this seminar will be available in a couple of days. And we will look forward to seeing you back for our next seminar, so keep an eye on your inbox for the flyer and registration information. But before we close this session, I would like to invite Maria to share some information about an exciting new early childhood teaching qualification being offered by the University of Auckland. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Justine, and thank you to those who are present with us today and are still there. What we want to do is just to advertise an upcoming webinar that our early childhood team are hosting outside of the early childhood seminar series. And this webinar will introduce our new Master of Teaching and Learning early childhood degree. This will be a one-year, full-time, face-to-face initial teacher education program designed for individuals, including any unqualified staff who already hold a degree in any topic and have a strong commitment and passion for teaching and learning with young children. So it's been a lot of work to develop this master's. Kiri, Justine, and I are involved in it, and you'll probably hear more insights from our research and all our research projects as part of this master's. It does offer a rare opportunity to gain a New Zealand early childhood teaching qualification and a master's degree at the same time, as well as eligibility to apply for teacher registration and provisional certification with the Teaching Council of Aotearoa. So if you are interested to learn more about this program and to see whether it is for you, please connect to the QR code that's on the slide. to go to our website and or to register to attend. So I'll leave that there, and thank you all for your time, and thank you, Justine and Helen.
Maria, and thank you to everybody who has joined us today. And we'll close with karakia. Me inoi tātou. Kia tau te rangi Mārie o te rangi I tu iho nei, o papatauanuku I tākoto nei, o te tai ao I awhi nei. Ki runga I a tātou, tihei mauri ora. May the peace of the sky above, of the earth below, of the all-embracing universe rest upon us all. Behold, it is life. Take good care, everyone. Ka kite anō.